Yeah, welcome everybody, and welcome to our lecturer, Nicole Chase. She comes from the, she's the current director of projects of SETS USA, and she will talk about psychological and physiological implications of settling Mars, lessons learned from analog astronauts. So I wish you fun in listening, and you can start.
Cool. Alrighty. So, quick agenda. I'm gonna give a brief introduction of what I did, and then straight into the results. The first off with the demographic related results, the non-demographic related results, the conclusion, and then the next steps. My kind of what I'm thinking, what I would like to do at some point soon, essentially. All right, and then of course time for questions should you all have any. So introduction. So the purpose of the study was to essentially just gather information about the experiences of analog astronauts around the globe who have done at least one mission. In doing so, this would allow me to potentially draw preliminary conclusions about what steps should be taken into consideration for long duration missions, i.e. to Mars and also Europa. Target audience obviously is analog astronauts who have done at least one mission. This was a particular call out point because I didn't want people who, were in the process of training to do a mission, or people who haven't, or people who are considered analog astronauts but haven't done a mission and stuff like that, because not that I wouldn't value their opinions, but they were not in scope for this particular thing that I was doing. And then a brief overview of the survey. So I asked 17 questions, both demographic and non-demographic in nature. 21 people initially started the survey, and I will call that out on the next couple of slides. And over the course of the survey, the final amount of people who ended up taking were 14 people. Unfortunately not every single question was required, so that's why some of the people dropped off. And in the future, I would definitely make all the questions required, particularly those of the extended response questions, which were, there's a question that I asked, which I will cover in a future slide, that asked, have you ever done an mission in what's considered to be an extreme environment? Some of those extended responses that were very interesting that I thought were going to be really interesting to try to get results from, were not completed by everybody who attempted that previous question. So it had pretty poor completion rates. And so as such, I would definitely make those questions required, or at the very least make it in such a way where they didn't have to write out their responses, and it could be more like a multiple choice sort of situation. All right, so demographic related results. So I asked age, the location, the gender identity, and the ethnicity of those who took the survey. I was not surprised that it was mostly the 25 to 34-year-olds. What I was surprised about was how there was, there was quite a few people that were over the age of 35 who took the survey. That was something that I was definitely not expecting. I naively assumed that the bulk of the people would be between 18 to 24, because I figured that would be more of your stereotypical college age. And as such, they would be more likely to do those sort of missions because maybe they do them like during their winter break, or maybe they do it during the summer or something like that, for more experiences, instead of doing an internship, they do an analog mission, that sort of thing. Location absolutely surprised me because I was kind of blown away that the bulk of the people who responded to that question were from Israel. As it turns out, there was, of those people who were from Israel, a lot of them mentioned that they had done a particular mission in Israel, which is kind of cool. I was naively assuming that the bulk of it would be from America, because I am from America, and I was advertising it to what I presume to be a mostly American audience. But I also reached out to a bunch of other organizations that do analog missions and do analog mission related stuff. So apparently that was in my favor. Gender identity, the bulk of the people who responded identified as male and then female. So pretty good gender reflection, which is actually surprising to me. Ethnicity, not surprising that the bulk of which are white, but it was a pretty good mix of people after the dominant white. So non-demographic related results. I know this is a wall of text, but I wanted to just like spit everything out there so everyone can see it all at once. So all of the ones that are underlined and bolded are questions that I asked. So first and foremost, I wanted to, call out, be like, okay, you need to have participated in at least one mission. If not, you're not qualified to take the survey. So there's 10 people that indicated that they've done one mission, and then 3 people mentioned that they've done 2, and 2 people that they mentioned that they've done 3, which I'm kind of surprised that there was that many people that had done more than 1. So 14 people mentioned that they've done an emission in an extreme environment. This was a question that I had alluded to a couple slides ago about how, there was 14 people that indicated that they've done a mission in an extreme environment, but there wasn't 14 people that gave an explanation in terms of how they define extreme. Like, was it in the subarctic? Was it underwater? Was it in a location that had limited resources and they had to do EVAs to gather resources, that sort of thing? That's something I was like more interested in. As part of my study, I was really interested in the medical information that was gathered. And by that, I mean like vitals and such. So of the 18 people who attended that question, 12 indicated that medical information like vitals and whatnot were collected during the course of the mission. I called out psychological information as a separate category because in my mind, medical information, while encompassing vitals, is different from that of mental health. So of the 18 people who attempted, 11 people mentioned that mental health checks were done throughout the course of their mission. I was kind of surprised by the next one about prior training, that 12 people mentioned that they have received little to no training of the psychological and physiological principles prior to their mission. That was kind of a red flag for me. And post-mission impacts, I was absolutely not surprised that 12 people indicated of the 17 who attempted that they noticed changes either psychologically or physiologically after their missions. I didn't ask for specifics because I didn't want to knock on HIPAA's door, but that would be something that I would do in the future under the guidance of making sure that I'm not knocking on HIPAA's door in order to actually see like if there's some sort of patterns that emerge, like maybe people were more likely to, be timid in sort of, scary situations. Maybe they experience a spike in loneliness. Maybe they experience, blood pressure spikes and stuff like that, that sort of thing. Maybe they develop a mild form of PTSD because of something that potentially traumatic that happened. I'm not sure. That would be something that would have to be done in the future. So Mars similarities. Of the 16 people who attempted this, 11 people believed that their particular mission or missions, if they were one of the ones that did more than one, shed light into how conditions en route to Mars and then living on Mars would be like. So this was an interesting question that I asked. I asked people, okay, based upon your experiences having done an analog mission, based upon the following requirements that I've mentioned on the slide, what ones are you thinking would be the most important to to take into consideration when traveling to Mars and then once living on Mars? Unsurprisingly, 6 people mentioned life support technologies because of course it's important to survive. I was kind of surprised that no one picked food. Maybe that's something that's just not a concern to people. Maybe that's something that they just assume there's going to be like a nutrition pill that people take, or, we'll just figure out how to genetically modify plants in order to grow in whether it be in our Martian habitats or in the soil quality that exists on Mars. And then how to deal with the physical gravitations from living on Earth to living on Mars, loneliness, and how do humans safely but quickly accumulate to living on Mars. I was pleased that of the 60 people who responded to the question, if the space industry is taking that selection that they made above seriously, 11 people responded with yes. So it's on the plus side a good step in the right direction that presumably people are under the assumption that the space industry is definitely taking consideration the fact that, like, look, we don't have all the life support technologies that we're going to need to, you know, to be able to live in in the Martian sort of gravitational force, and, you know, with respect to like radiation and with respect to the temperature differences and stuff like that, like we're in a good step. Like we are on a good path, so to speak. So conclusions. Again, another wall of text, but I just wanted to throw everything out there. And obviously it's very important to make sure that future Martian astronauts have proper life support technologies. And then as such, is also good to like test out those life support technologies in some sort of capacity during analog missions in order to kind of do like in situ related research, you know, like testing out, so to speak, like they can serve as like beta tests or alpha tests, beta tests, that sort of thing, to see if these technologies truly do work and improve upon the quality of life for people who are doing EVAs or whatever. Really, one of the more important things that I have called out on this is making sure that there's proper and well-documented follow-ups with people after their missions, because it's important to look at the long-term impacts of doing a mission, particularly if you're secluded from people, if you're isolated from people, if you're working in really close quarters with people who you may not be familiar with, and maybe you don't have, you know, the trust or camaraderie. Like how do we make sure that that trust and camaraderie is there when you could potentially rely on them to potentially save your life should something go wrong to either you or to someone else on your crew. Another good thing that I was really gunning for based upon the results of my research was the training thing. Again, I was really surprised that there didn't seem to be proper training, or people indicated that they received little to no training prior to an analog mission. So it's very important to make sure that there is streamlined training for both the psychological and physiological things that they should be looking out for, both pre, during, and post their mission, in order to make sure that, you know, they're aware of potential like red flags, so that way they can call out those red flags before they manifest themselves in something that might be far worse. And obviously this is a good thing to also present to, you know, for future Martian astronauts as well, which will be a lot further away from proper medical attention than those who are doing analog missions on Earth. And also a good thing to have like baseline vital information, i.e. temperature, blood pressure, heart rate, oxygenation values, etc., in order to compare those with vital checks throughout the course of the mission, in order to just get an idea of how certain events impact their vitals, how certain events impact their psyche and stuff like that. So that way, if there's something that, you know, can be like forecasted, that, you know, maybe someone's blood pressure spikes a lot higher than someone else's, like try to see if there's a reason why someone's blood pressure spikes a lot more than someone else's. You know, really get to, you know, the root cause of that in order to properly understand why some people react a certain way than others. Like, is it their disposition? Is it the fact that maybe there's some better cardiac health? You know, that sort of thing. So next steps. So restructuring of the survey and sending out additional surveys, like I mentioned, making the questions making every single question required, eliminating the free text approach as well in some sort of capacity, speaking with subject matter experts about best practices in order to have data collected or data gathered for future studies. That would be the most beneficial. Doing more independent research about potential wearables that analog astronauts will have. There was something that I was going to submit to Trish, which is a space medicine, a space medicine institute that's out of Baylor College in Texas. They had a design competition that I was going to submit something to, but I didn't submit to it because I was still in the process of like gathering information and gathering data. But one of the ideas that I had was a potential wearable that can monitor the neurotransmitter concentration of the brain, focusing more on the amygdala, which is a part of the brain that is associated mostly with like anger and stuff like that. So it would be a good concentration thing to get an idea of the mental health status of individuals. So that's something that is definitely in its infancy stages. Like it's something that I just kind of like spoke out into the universe and did like some minor research about it, but I didn't want to like go headfirst into it. But so as a result of this as a result of the survey, this is something that I will definitely take into consideration more and see if it actually does have any legs. So going off of that, teaming up with institutions around the world, academia or otherwise, such as Trish or Baylor College, about how best to educate analog astronauts about the psychological and physiological impacts of their missions. And then in doing so, kind of taking that and modeling it with, or to future missions, whether that be to Mars or Europa or the moon. All right, that's all I had. Anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. And if you have a question but you don't want to ask it, or you have something that comes up in the future, feel free to shoot me an email. Here's my SEDS email address, and I'm also on Twitter. Feel free to follow me on Twitter, send me a tweet.
Thank you, Nicole. We've got plenty of time for questions, so if anybody has questions, please feel free to type those into the chat window, and I'll pass them along to Nicole. Pablo asks, well, he has a comment here. He says, in this reference to follow up with post-mission interview, has anyone seen the movie Avatar? I noted that in the movie, the character was required to video reports after mission activity and to share his thoughts, feelings, and information observed. Interesting. So do you have any comments on the value of subjective versus objective observations on participant activities?
I feel like, both are definitely important. And I feel like it would more depend upon what type of question or questions that the subjective versus objective observations we're trying to answer. I know personally, I feel like I would get a lot more out of it by hearing directly from somebody what they experienced, what was the hardest part of their mission, what was something that they didn't think that they could have done, but they did because of teamwork, what was struggles that they've had, to compare themselves. Maybe if they did like an intake video, at certain parts throughout the course of their mission, say it was a couple month-long mission, if they did, a video of some sort, like at the start of every single week or something like that, to compare their exit interview, so to speak, with some of the earlier ones, like to see how they've changed, to see how if issues that they might have had in the past has grown or resolved themselves, that sort of thing. And then comparing that information with some of the vital information that was collected to see if something validates itself. Not that I'm going to completely distrust what the person is saying, but at the same time, if the data that was collected has changed along with the person, then that's something to definitely be noted as well. Particularly if the numbers if their blood pressure started off really high and it became, significantly lower and more, like baseline normal, same thing with their pulse. That would be something that would be really interesting to kind of look at.
Thank you. Nathaniel asks, what do you see as the largest physiological, and I would also add psychological, barriers to long-term spaceflight?
I feel like personally it would be the psychological aspect of just being able to be not around anyone, like any loved ones, and not being able to contact family members like instantly, like you obviously wouldn't have your phone, and, you know, be able to send a text message and have it go to that person instantaneously. So being able to cope with the fact that you're just not going to be around people for X amount of time would be definitely a big hindrance. In addition to the psychological aspect of it, I feel like a big physiological aspect of it would be just the long-term impacts of zero gravity, you know, particularly if you're in a long duration mission. You know, how best do you protect your body from the impacts of living in zero G's over the course of time? I mean, obviously there's a lot of stuff that people do on board the ISS that does help, but it still doesn't completely make themselves 1000% safe from the lack of gravity.
Thank you. Ron asks, what would your ideal size control group be? I'm not sure if he's referring to experimental or operational, but maybe you could address both of those ideas.
I feel like an N value of at least a couple of hundred. That way it would be really good to get an idea of, that way there's a good mix of people from all over the world who have done analog missions all over the world, as opposed to just in like 2 countries like mine did. Just to see their result, just to see how, you know, if some countries are better suited for educational aspect of it, if they're better suited for the collection of various information at, you know, regimented sort of times, that sort of thing. And then in the attempt of, if I were to be working with, you know, an academic institution or with NASA or whomever, in order for, you know, hypothetical future wearable technologies that maybe I'll, you know, have a part in design, helping to design, it would definitely be, you know, at least a couple of hundred for an N value, at least to start. And then from there, the N value would grow, because if not, you're not going to have a decent P-score, and it's not going to be statistically significant if you have anything less than at least a couple of hundred in my mind.
Sure, yeah, that'd be very interesting also to look at how the cultural influences affect those results. We have 2 questions here, one from Maya and one from K and I, which are both kind of along the same vein. Maya asks, what would be the best solution to maintain a good mental health in such missions? And Kay and I ask, what psychological coping strategy would you suggest to develop? What would be the coping mechanism?
I feel like a good coping mechanism would be to do, like, you know, journaling in some sort of capacity, whether that be just like, you know, doing like a word vomit thing. You just like write out everything that you're feeling, and so you can get out your frustrations. You can actually see what you're feeling. That's something that I've done in therapy, and something that I do myself independent of therapy, that really helps me cope with the hellish sort of nightmares that I personally deal with. So being able to, I guess, and taking that one step further, being able to apply like known psychological related coping mechanisms, and applying that to and applying those principles to long duration space missions would be really crucial in order to help to minimize the mental related impacts, whether that be anxiety, depression, paranoia, PTSD, loneliness, whatever, and anything in between those, and anything between those or not anything that's not those, honestly. And being able to really fully understand those, and being able to, you know, show that it's okay to feel like this, that you're not a weakling because you feel lonely, because you feel depressed, because you feel anxious, that it's something that is in your brain. You know, your brain just is something that's just expressing itself that way, and it's something that you did not do anything wrong. Like being able to communicate that to them, particularly if prior to going on this mission, they've never experienced, you know, maybe they experienced, you know, some gloomy days, but they've never been in, you know, a long term, you know, they've never had depression longer than like, you know, a couple of days or something like that. Nor were they ever like medicated, nor had they ever gone to therapy. Because there currently is already a stigma about mental health in at least America, and I'm assuming it applies to the rest of the world. And so being able to, you know, take the information from psychological related from therapy essentially, and applying it so that way it, completely eliminates the stigma in space, because unlike Earth, you can, call up your counselor, you can do text messaging and stuff like that, whereas in space, it's going to be a lot harder in order to, speak with someone that you can like just get everything out and being able to, achieve some sort of like baseline normalcy for you.
Thank you. That's an interesting strategy, just writing things down to kind of bypass the conscious filter of the way that we analyze things. Patrick asks, what's your analysis of the complications experienced in the Biosphere 2 project from the 1990s? Are those sort of personality issues common, or were those researchers just more temperamental than most people? Are you familiar with that?
Admittedly, I'm not familiar with it,
Okay.
but I'm definitely going to make a note about that and look it up.
I'm going to interject my own question here, just because it fits in. You mentioned a few minutes ago PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
I had an experience in an analog simulation this last year where I found myself kind of crying because I was overwhelmed by the taste of raspberries. And it's interesting because coming back, that's something that you can't necessarily describe to other people.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see a lot of similarities between people who are coming back from these kinds of experiences and people who are returning from military theaters in terms of the transitions that they have to make?
I feel like, I definitely feel like that would probably be the case. I haven't really done a lot of like in-depth analysis about that, but because, I'm not equating analog, serving on a mission as an analog astronaut with serving in the military and seeing potential combat and, people dying in front of you. But at the same time, it's definitely, some similarities in terms of like, being with a cohort, being with a group of people every single day, being able to, living with them, working with them, doing tasks, relying with them and stuff like that. And then when everything's done, then you have to somehow, assimilate back into the real world where you're not around those people every single day, when you're not having to do everything that you needed to do during your mission and stuff like that. So I definitely could see a lot of similarities and whatnot, particularly if, in the instance of your case with respect to, raspberries and stuff like that, there's definitely some, like triggers that, they don't have to be big. Like in your instance, it's a raspberry. And, there's definitely something to be said about, being able to, seeing those, reacting to that and not being able to really fully explain that to somebody because they haven't lived the same experiences as you. And obviously that can make, someone feel like, oh, well, there's something wrong with me because, I'm not supposed to be emotional over, seeing a car or being able to, seeing X or seeing Y. And it's a good thing to, normalize the fact that like, it's okay to be kind of shaken up about these sort of things. Like it's okay because it's part of what PTSD is.
Thank you. Just as a reminder for our participants, we have about 2 minutes left before the next round of track sessions begin. If you'd like to go ahead and go to those, you're welcome to. We still have some time to answer questions with Nicole. We can keep doing that for about 10 minutes. And we do have quite a few more questions here if you're all right with answering those, Nicole.
Oh yeah, totally.
Okay. We have a question, I think from, I'm not sure how to say this name, Serta Camello. And this person asks, are astronauts going to be requested to go in these analog missions before an actual mission? Would you like to perform this research with actual astronauts?
I'd be willing to assume that astronauts who are going to Mars or something, or any sort of long duration mission should definitely do something similar in nature to an analog mission, at least kind of like a trial period to get an idea of like, okay, here's what it's like to do an EVA, here's what it's like. Admittedly, I'm not not well rehearsed in how training for those sort of missions actually happen by NASA astronauts or ESA astronauts or whatever. But I definitely feel like, you know, that should be done, particularly since we've obviously never been to Mars. And it's going to be a whole new, you know, it's going to be eons different than going to the moon, by a lot of reasons. But I absolutely would be interested in, you know, working with space-related agencies and stuff like that. I have a big interest in space medicine, which is why I did this. And it would be really interesting to work alongside NASA astronauts or ESA astronauts or whomever in order to, you know, do studies and stuff like that, particularly pre and post long duration missions like Mars.
Thank you. Let's see. Yeah, I think that analog training is pretty standard in space flight in general. This kind of ties into that a little bit. Francois asks, did you envision to identify the key medical risks linked to an astronaut to better provide personalized mitigation actions, sensitivity to radiation, predisposition to anxiety, depression, nutritional needs, etc.? So I think what I get from this question is, can those mitigation strategies or coping mechanisms be tailored to the individual?
I feel like they could be to an extent. I'm not sure they could be completely personalized because every single person's brain chemistry is different and we all react to different things because we all interpret reality differently. But in terms of, like, there could be definitely, you know, some like targeted approaches. But honestly, like, it would be really cool to do individualized related things, but that's something that would probably happen in the future. And I'm willing to assume probably isn't available or isn't, you know, readily available right now because of the wearable technologies that need to be created still for that to happen.
Thank you. So Henry asks, you mentioned the wearable technologies, and this might tie into that. Henry asks, what would be the #1 thing to implement to gather better data in these experiments?
I feel like having like not constant, but have pretty regular vitals checks. I work in an emergency room. I'm a medical scribe. It's my part-time job. And like we do vitals checks really frequently in order, particularly on patients who are like more critical or come in with different, you know, they come in with like chest pain and they might, you know, they're kind of like a risk for a heart attack because of various factors and stuff like that. So being able to, you know, constantly have that information in front of you would be really beneficial, I think.
All right. Maria asks, this is kind of a little bit of a long question, but in terms of mental health, in your opinion, what will the mental expansion look like for the part of society that does not consider the potential of more widely available space travel up to now, once it becomes widely available? How do you think the mental expansion will impact wider societal issues that the world is currently battling?
It's a good question. I like that question. I feel like it would potentially like help to normalize the fact that it's okay to it's okay to acknowledge your feelings and not keep them bottled up and stuff like that. I know in the wake of like, well, what's happening in the pandemic, for instance, like there's a lot of people who I'm friends with or just like I observe on social media and stuff like that who, you know, were more like neurotypical individuals in that like they had their gloomy days, but they were generally had a happy disposition and stuff like that. And now they're like, I don't know how to function. Like I just don't know how to react. And it's similar in nature to, I'm assuming what someone in a long duration mission would have to do that because, you know, they were living their life in one particular way. And then all of a sudden they're, you know, yanked out of that and thrown into a completely different situation. I mean, obviously they're going to have the training necessary in order to do that, but all the training in the world isn't going to prepare them for when they actually do that. From, you know, this is me just taking a wild guess. Kind of similar to like childbirth. Like you can read all the, you know, when you're what to expect when you're expecting related books in the world, but based upon friends that I know who have given birth, that doesn't prepare you for, nothing in the world can prepare you for when you hold your child in your hands, in your arms for the first time after, you know, after delivery. Not that I'm equating childbirth with mental health at all, but, you know, for my metaphor's sake. But I feel like it would help to, you know, seeing people in space and seeing people in space deal with that sort of thing, as long as it's not broadcast in a way that feels like reality show-esque, because you don't want to, that's like a fine line to walk between. Like you don't want to make it into like, you know, reality show, like, oh, look at, you know, the astronauts up there, they're like, you know, losing their minds because, you know, they're by themselves and they haven't talked to anybody in like a year and a half. Like, haha, good for them. You know, that there's a line that needs to be followed in order to make sure that like the human aspect of that is still there, that like the empathy is still there as well. But I feel like that would really be there's definitely a lot to be said about how people in space, you know, dealing with being away from, you know, everything and everything that they've ever known, because, you know, they're you know, miles away from Earth, will be able to like how we deal with that, I guess, like how that can be broadcast and how that can educate people about the importance of a mental health, that, you know, just because you have a happy disposition and stuff like that doesn't necessarily mean that you're like immune from, you know, experiencing loneliness, from experiencing isolation, from experiencing, you know, paranoia, from experiencing just like helplessness and just not wanting to do anything. You're just like sitting in a ball on the floor and just like wanting to cry all the time, but you don't. Like it would be good to help, you know, normalize that, I guess.
Thank you. Yeah, that's interesting how those patterns in a small demographic kind of extrapolate to a larger population. Just a couple of additional questions here. Pablo asks, would a mascot or a dog for a mission be something to consider in helping and coping with such long missions?
Oh, kind of like a therapy dog in space sort of thing. That'd be cool. I feel like that's something that could definitely be taken into consideration. I mean, it would definitely be delayed because of, you know, the communication between planets. But that definitely could be something that would be, you know, definitely beneficial. I mean, therapy dogs you know, are huge, you know, in general. They bring people a lot of joy, both in hospitals as well as, you know, people who are working in high stress jobs and stuff like that. But yeah, I'm gonna make a note of that.
Now, I apologize for my dog barking as I was asking that question, but we do see a lot more of those therapy dogs in different public situations these days. I work at the airport and see a lot more of them. So it's becoming more and more common. The last question that I have here, Sybil asks, do you think we can use to our advantage the physiological conclusions of Mars simulation missions in this pandemic time, or to help confined people, or is that too different?
I feel like it would be, I mean, I feel like there's definitely some similarities. At least it would be good from like, just to get like, you know, like a good pilot study, just to get an idea of like, because of the suddenness, well, not really the suddenness, but because of just how widespread the pandemic is, obviously with the nature of a pandemic, of course, it's widespread, but just like how it's impacting people differently would be, and just like the sheer amount of data that can come out of that would be an excellent like baseline thing. And then from there, you can get more like, you know, focused.
So it sounds like you're suggesting that the data works the other way, that we gain data from the larger population to apply to the smaller group?
Yeah, I guess like with respect to, you know, just collecting like, you know, baseline information from a larger group, because the data's there. Like, you know, you have people who, experience, like, you know, there's not much difference that has happened because of, you know, the pandemic and whatnot. You know, maybe there's some minor changes, but it's not as dramatic as other people. So, and then from there you can take those patterns and those analyses and see, you know, maybe create like some sort of forecasting model or something like that, and then see if those still exist in a smaller model that's more controlled, and is not as, you know, something that's more controlled within like an analog related mission sort of situation, as opposed to a pandemic where there's so many variables and so many moving parts. Taking into consideration, of course, that the model may not, you know, fit in exactly. It could be, you know, a square trying to fit into like a circle or something like that, which is impossible. It's not going to work. But at the very least, it could, you know, serve as a preliminary sort of situation. Like I wouldn't write that. I definitely wouldn't write that model like in pen, or like, you know, commit it and just be like, okay, I'm done, and just walk away from it. Like, it definitely is something that's going to be an iterative, oh my God, an iterative sort of situation.
Very good. Well, thank you so much, Nicole. That was an excellent presentation.
Yeah, thanks.
I think that that's all the questions that we have.
Awesome.
And if nobody else has anything else, then we'll go ahead and conclude this session and move
Cool.
on to the next one. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you.